I'm Megan Palmer, and I'll be facilitating it today, and I appreciate you all being on time as we work on finagling this WebEx. It's new, certainly new to me, and probably some of you as well. But we have a lot to cover today, so we want to go ahead and get started. Before I get too much into the bulk of what we're going to discuss, just a couple reminders. When you log into these meetings, please enter present in the chat box so that we can take attendance. And also, if possible, please leave your cameras on. It makes it more personable during this time of virtual reality. So we ask that you do that. And mute microphones when you're not speaking, and feel free to remind me to do the same. As we discovered last meeting, I struggled a little bit with that, but I think I'm going to be better this time. Let me see if there was anything else. I'll get to that in a minute. Just want to give you what the purpose of today's session is. We met with Victoria, Jerome, and Dina, and basically there's three objectives for this meeting this afternoon, and that is to hopefully finalize the mission or the purpose statement for this task force, to group the 10 impact areas into subgroups, categories, or as we called them last time, buckets, and then finally to present a proposed timeline with milestones for you to give feedback on. So we've got a lot to cover, and we're just going to go ahead and get started. So I am going to share my PowerPoint slide that's going to guide us through today's meeting. Okay, I'm hoping that everyone can see that. And just to catch up, a couple of other housekeeping, we'll get to the welcome in a second, but just to also know that when we did meet, Dina, Victoria, Jerome, and I to plan these meetings, we talked about attendance. And what we agreed upon is, if at all possible, come to every meeting that's scheduled. Even if you have to come late, we really need your participation and your input. But if you miss 3 consecutive meetings, we will revisit your continued participation on the task force. We know that things come up, and we do have a couple of alternates on the task team. So just be aware that we are going to be taking attendance. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Victoria and Jerome. Welcome, everyone. I get tongue-tied.
Welcome, everyone. Victoria, do you mind if I start off?
Please do.
Okay. Well, welcome, everyone. There's been 2 weeks since our initial meeting. We've done some background work that we're going to engage with all of you today. I want to thank you for your continued engagement, interest, and offering your subject matter expertise in these areas, so that we can hopefully come up with some very firm recommendations for the county commissioners when we're all said and done. Just want to once again repeat some of the roles and responsibilities that we talked about a little bit last week. We would love for everyone to make sure they are on top of the materials that were sent out ahead of time, to be well versed in all the information that has been presented to the best of your ability, to be available for discussions periodically in between meetings. Have your voice heard. As well as opening up your ears to listen to other thoughts and ideas as we move forward. Lastly, just want to encourage all of you to look at the roster of individuals that make up this task force. Given the fact that we are unable to meet in person, we want to make sure that all of the individuals connect with each other, understand areas of expertise, so that we can exchange ideas and concepts. Victoria, anything else you would like to add?
No, I think you covered it. I think we've got a pretty full agenda and we can jump in.
Okay, thank you, Jerome and Victoria. And just to review very briefly what we came out of the last meeting, the suggestions that came out of the breakout sessions was to break down those impact areas into categories or buckets to make it more manageable. To also come up with a timeline with some milestones that will give the task team some clear direction. And also, Dina said that more than likely we would have a year to accomplish the planning and to come up with action plans to recommend to the Board of County Commissioners. So that's where we ended it at the last meeting. We again are going to go into our breakout sessions, and Victoria, Jerome, and I will be leading those to a point. We do expect for everyone to participate. We do want you to pick, when you get in your breakout session, a spokesperson and help manage each other. Victoria, Jerome, and I will be there to lead and make sure that you stay on task and manage the time. But our role isn't necessarily to come up with the ideas ourselves. We want to help you brainstorm. When we get to that part in the agenda, we'll give you the specific instructions on how to do that. So, in looking at the agenda, the next item is the mission and purpose statement. Victoria and Jerome worked on this together, and I think this is a really good combination of some really strong thoughts. And so I'm just going to read it to you, and then I'll let Victoria and Jerome open up for feedback or have questions, or if you have clarification. But I want to make sure everyone hears it at the same time. The task force will bring forward a series of action plans based on comprehensive analysis of the COVID-19 impact areas in order to promote a county-wide coordinated effort to support recovery and renewal for Mecklenburg County residents. Recovery and renewal must address issues of equity that have been laid bare by the impact of the crisis. Action plans will present recommendations that will focus on immediate response efforts for impact areas, as well as long-term actions that can affect systemic issues that must be addressed to ensure health and prosperity for all residents. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Victoria and Jerome to lead a discussion on some thoughts and feedback.
Thank you, Megan. So I just want to provide you all just a little bit of context and background. So all of this language is basically, except for a few words here and there, in the resolution. And what we realized is that the resolution with its legalese with whereas can just get you lost in the alphabet soup that is that resolution. So what we wanted to do, and what we heard from your feedback, is we really needed to create a clear mission or action statement that could guide us. So this would be something that we would have on all of our agendas so that it's always at the forefront of every meeting, and really we'll probably put it on all of our documents as we're working through. So this just reminds us that this is what we teased out, but this is really the charge, or what we hope we've created to convey to you all the charge. So that's the context behind how we worked on it. Jerome, did you want to give any other thoughts on how we pulled this together?
No, Victoria, that was spot on. Mm-hmm. And we'd love to hear feedback from other members of the task force once you finish.
Yeah. So we'd just like to invite everybody, let us know what you think. Is it clear enough? We want to make sure that it really does give you the understanding of what our charge is.
Hey, this is Greg Monte. What do you mean by a series of action plans?
So right now we have 10 impact areas. So it really just depends on how we decide the work products turn out. So you could have an action plan for each of the 10 impact areas. If we condense things down into the buckets, as we're all seem to be in agreement, we may have an action plan for each one of those 3 to 4 areas, however the consensus guides us. So you may have individual ones, or maybe we come together and we have, one action plan, but the resolution does give us the freedom to break out and have subject matter focused action plans if that is the direction of the task force.
Greg, this is in an effort to make this large scope of activities much more manageable.
I also want to let y'all know that I still can't see the gallery, nor can I see the extended chat feature as long as I'm presenting. And so Chris Daniels is helping me recognize anybody who has raised their hand or has a question or comment in the chat function. So if you're wondering where I am, I just can't see who's doing what at this point.
This is Bernadette. I have a question. Are we going to be given any insight into budget constraints?
So, Bernadette, interestingly, yes, and, right? So when we look at these areas, right, some of the discussions that have occurred over the last 2 weeks behind the scenes include, well, we know there are buckets of money out there already appropriated for certain activities. And so we want to ensure that we don't just leave that money on the table, okay? And so we're going to look at all the buckets of money that's already out there, hopefully in order of when those monies expire so that we don't leave it on the table. Hopefully that answers your question.
So I guess my question on the series of action plans, I was trying to look at the timeline that was provided and trying to see where that all connects. If there was some idea on, we want to have an action plan every 2 months for the next year for each of the 10 or something like that. That's where I was asking what the intent here, the resolution says an action plan or plan. So I didn't know if there was any additional discussion on that, so we can start thinking about, what this task force needs to deliver to the county.
Yeah, I hope when we come out of our breakout sessions today, we will have some strong consensus from everybody on how we may be grouping these or categorizing these impact areas. And from that, I think we can probably surmise a little bit of forecasting the work on how that would look in those action plans. And what we may find, we say plans now, but I think we leave us that opportunity if we need to break things up. But we may find that a lot of these things, potentially, I don't know, are cross-cutting issues, and it may be one overarching plan with a series of goals and objectives with recommendations flowing down. So it could possibly be like your typical strategic plan where we have, a couple focus areas and recommendations and measures aligning with each of those series. So I think we just want to make sure we leave ourselves the freedom, because we have a lot of different expertise, and I think a lot of folks are going to give a lot of good input on what the product should look like. So we don't want to prescribe that it may be one thing. We want to give a little bit of flexibility on what that output product could be.
So this is Gina Neverett. I have a question. Do you guys have any kind of gold standards of practice for some of the areas that we're looking at? I mean, we clearly, we're doing this like mid-September, so I would imagine that there have been other cities that have already tackled this and are already on the way to kind of renewal and recovery. So can we have access to any of that? I mean, as opposed to us just kind of looking in the dark kind of thing?
So
go ahead, Victoria. Great call out, Gina. So part of the activities will include not just evaluating what's already out there external to our county, but activities already ongoing within the county. To your point, we've discussed not recreating the wheel. We discussed not duplicating activities in work. There are activities that may work in certain areas and may not, counties or regions of the country that may not work in our area. But to your point, we should be looking at, task force should be looking at activities already in that space to see what's working, what's not working. Did you want to add anything, Victoria?
Yeah, the only thing that I'll add is, so when we look at the work products, part of this process is that the external internal evaluation, right? And we always want to see about benchmarking, and I think that's really kind of what what you're talking about a little bit is benchmarking with other like communities. So we'll have the opportunity to do that, and we'll have the county staff at our disposal to do that. But to get to that point, we do need to focus on, what our buckets are and be able to give them a clear work assignment and cut them loose to bring that information back to us. But that'll be part of the process on the timeline. I think I listed it as a SWOT, which means an assessment of your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And under our opportunity portion is typically where you go and look at those benchmark communities to see what they're doing and see if any of their practices could potentially apply. And those types of things would lay into our recommendations. So yes, we'll get there. I have a feeling that Stina staff's going to have way more work coming their way from all of us. But yes, that's definitely something we will cover. And what I will say to folks, if you see things on the news with other communities, start passing that information into us so that we can point the staff to that and have them start collecting. So if you already have those best practices that you've seen and you're interested in digging into, get that information over to us and we'll start making a catalog and getting that to staff and getting the research disseminated to teams that we'll eventually break up into. Thank you, Gina. That's a great question.
And thank you, Victoria and Jerome. And to keep us on task, what we're looking at right here, I think we're going to have more discussion on the timeline and perhaps some of the resources that we passed out prior to the meeting with the overview with the funding that's already in place. But as far as this mission statement goes, is there anything in there that you can't live with? Because we're looking for consensus at this point. Not that this can't change, but for the most part, can everyone agree? And if so, if you would enter into the chat box that either you agree or it's consensus in your mind. If you would take a moment to do that, because we do have a lot to cover, especially in the chat and the breakout session. Okay, looks like everyone's taking care of that. And if there's no objections, I'm going to move on to the next activity. Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm trying to type really fast, but so my only issue with this statement is that we continue to talk about recovery and renewal, and that doesn't give space for how do we stop the spread of the virus? How do we stop the spread of the, kind of suicide rates? How do we do a preventative, which is what we had talked about last time when I brought up the issue about the buckets. We had talked about, how do we stop mental health issues before they start? How do we stop people from becoming homeless? How do we stop the spread of the virus? So forth. Anyway.
So, Gina, I think that's all part of this task force, right? As I mentioned, I think you were in my breakout group last week or 2 weeks ago. A lot of these challenges predated COVID, right? A lot of the challenges that set up the atmosphere for inequities predated COVID, and so part of our charge is to come up with recommendations. To your point, how do we stop, how do we prevent, how do we mitigate, how do we contain this challenge. That's part of our charter.
Does that answer your question, Gina?
Yeah, somewhat, yeah.
Okay. Well, we can revisit this or perhaps have another conversation offline. But if we're good, we're going to move on now to the.
Can I add something very quickly? Because what Gina just said just made me realize that we have completely different understanding of what recovery and renewal is. Because in my mind, this is not our job. Like, it's not our responsibility as a task force to stop the spread of the virus. And this is one of the things that we discussed in our previous meeting. We need to define what recovery and renewal are before we move forward, because it's just going to make it a challenge for us to do the work, and we don't have the basic understanding of recovery and renewal, if that makes sense.
Sure. Victoria, you had some really good thoughts last meeting on what your opinion was on renewal and recovery, especially with regard to this task force. Do you want to add to that or anything?
Yes, we were talking. The terminology last week was resiliency, and I think that was mentioned a little bit through the resolution. But I do think the resolution does speak to recovery and renewal, and specifically talking about not going back to business as normal. So not just for the businesses, but also for our social service providers. And our public service providers, realizing how fragile our systems can be. So what I would say to you is that I'm pretty confident now that we can pull that definition is there again in the resolution, but again, everything gets lost in that legalese of the resolution. So I think that's a very valid point to make sure that we're all singing from the same sheet of music. So what I would say is allow me to go, Jerome and I, to go back, pull that out, and crystallize what our Board of County Commissioners brought forward when they said recovery and renewal, and we'll work within that definition. And too, if we find that recovery and renewal through our assessment piece means something else, I think that's okay too, right? So I think we have to give ourselves that flexibility that we may put the line in the sand right here, but we might find at the end of this process that it really is going to mean something different to the community. But I agree, we'll get that clarity so that we have a clear objective with regards to what that term means. But I'm confident that it's in there. It's just we need to pull it out.
Okay. Victoria and Jerome, are we good to move on?
Yeah, I think so. We'll just note in the minutes that we're going to follow up and clarify that terminology, and then we will make sure we push that out to everybody, and we can have an offline conversation if we need to, or bring it forward at the next meeting, however we determine at the end of this call.
Okay. Thank you for your comments and your questions. I think that they're going to be really helpful in providing that clarity moving forward, especially as you really get down and dirty with the action plans. Okay, so let's look at the impact areas according to similarities. And what Victoria and Jerome worked on the last couple of weeks is taking those 10 impact areas and grouping them thematically or categories, what they might have in common. And so we have two options that we are going to review in your breakout rooms. And this is option A, and I'm just going to let you look at it. And I'm hoping that Jerome and Victoria, you have this PowerPoint if you wanted to refer to it in your breakout sessions to remind everyone. But this is option A. And you can see that there's some duplications of the impact areas. Now I'm going to show you option B. So there are similarities. I don't think that there too much difference there. But what you're going to do in your breakout sessions is look at them both. You may want to combine them somehow, tweak one, or there might be something missing. I'm not sure. But when you get into your breakout rooms, these are just some guidelines to help lead the discussion. And so Victoria, Jerome, and I will help you with this. What impact areas should be categorized together? And again, you can bounce off the two options that have been provided. Which impact areas need immediate attention and support? And what immediate actions do you recommend? So there may be some funding that's available before the end of this year. And so what do you think is the most urgent need or needs to address? Which impact issues will be the most challenging to address? And then if time permits, what subcommittees do you suggest? So those are just some guidelines. We're not, any conversation is going to be helpful, I'm sure. But at this time, if there's no questions, we're going to do the same thing we did the last meeting. You're going to leave this meeting at large, is what I call it, and then open up that second WebEx invitation you received from Mecklenburg County's IT staff and join your breakout session. And then we'll have that remain active for about 20 minutes because we need 10 minutes to come back into the meeting at large and debrief. So there's a lot in there to discuss. So we'll just get as far as we can. And then I'm going to look at my watch. I have 4:56, but I do want to give anybody a chance right now to ask any questions before we officially break from this meeting.
Okay, Megan, somebody just put in the chat box that they couldn't hear you. I'm able to hear you. Is anybody else unable to hear Megan? Okay, I think it may be on Daniel's end. Okay.
Thank you, Jerome. So most everyone can, okay. Any other questions, concerns? Okay, then I have 4:57 in 20 minutes, which someone help me do the math. That would be 4:17. Is that correct? We will rejoin the meeting at large. So we'll see you shortly.
Yours.
Well, looks like my team is the first one here, so if you want to continue the discussion, go ahead.
How are we thinking those subcommittees are going to work? Are we going to volunteer for the thing we feel most aligned with? Are we going to do that short stuff, rock, paper, scissors? What are you guys' thoughts on how that looks or what that looks like?
That I can tell you from Victoria, Jerome, and Dina, we have not discussed that yet. The only thing we've discussed is that the thought was subcommittees are definitely going to be utilized and needed. So the decision on how that works has not been discussed, but I'm sure that they're open to input and feedback. It would certainly be difficult if you are not familiar with health and mental health and the wellness piece, and you align better in another category. I'm sure that they want to align people's expertise and experience where it's going to be most appropriately used. So I think that's a question. Not sure if we're going to have time to dig into it today. An hour and a half is a short amount of time to meet virtually. It seems like everything takes almost twice as long. So we'll have to see if there's time at the end to discuss that.
Good.
It would be nice if we could meet in person. Wouldn't that be something?
It would probably make it easier, though we couldn't see each other's faces because we'd have masks on.
I've been actually pretty impressed by the, I know it's harder for you, Megan, as the facilitator, but on my end, I've been really impressed. I mean, I've had to deal with CMS and trying to get information about my kid through that. Oh my God. So to have this smaller group and Scott and the guys, I mean, when I hit that Zoom button, I am in. And when I leave, I am out. And then when I hit it again, I am in again. So I think that they're just delayed because they're just chatting. I mean, the technology, I don't feel on my side, but like I say, I know it's a much bigger animal for you.
You know, it is, and Mecklenburg County is upgrading their WebEx account. So by the end of this month, hopefully, you're not going to have to leave this big meeting to go to a breakout session. We're going to be able to do that all together. And the other thing that I'm struggling with is when I show my PowerPoint, I can't see you, I can't see the chat. Mecklenburg County did give me a second screen, which is very helpful. But I'm hoping when we get the upgrade, I can be more engaged.
Hey, Megan, this is Scott. So when you're showing your slides or whatever,
Yeah.
if you push your mouse pointer up to the top, it's going to drop down that orange outline bubble, and all your menu options are up there. So you'll have your participant list and your chat, and they become hover boxes. So you can drag them around on your desktop to wherever you want them, so you can still see your slides. So.
Yeah, I can see that those boxes, but they're tiny. And so I can only see like 3 participants. I have to keep scrolling down to see.
Yeah, well, you can size them or whatever. You can make them bigger or smaller or whatever size you want to. So we'll show you how to do that when we do the next training session.
Okay. All right, thank you, Scott.
Yeah.
Okay, I just got word that the other two rooms are finishing up, so they should be joining us shortly. And Keith, since we're the first group back, I'll let you report out first.
Sorry, Megan, I did a terrible time on keeping time. I wasn't paying attention.
I think we're finding that an hour and a half is a short amount of time to do a virtual meeting like this.
Well, and 4 questions is actually a lot. That's a lot. But
Okay, I believe the 3 groups are back, or they're on their way anyway, and in the interest of time, I think we need to go ahead and start reporting out. And I've asked Group C to debrief and provide just, 2 3-minute summary of what you discussed and what any recommendations are. And then we'll just go from there. So Keith was a spokesperson for the room C. So Keith, I'm going to turn it over to you.
So our group went with option B. We felt that option B made it a lot easier to focus. So we gave consensus to that, given it's more cut and concise. When looking at the 3 categories, we felt that the health and wellness bucket was probably the most acute, and that could be tackled a lot faster, and we could do a much better job with that. Additionally, food security, came up as an urgent matter, along with mental health, emotional health, and short and long-term goals attached to those that we really want to get on and make sure you can kind of have some talking points for that. And additionally, still need to clean up the task force focus, make it clean and directional for all members so that we can work in our areas much better. And finally, subcommittees make much more sense to us. How can we improve, reimagine systems with short and long-term solutions, and placing each other in subcommittees where we work better in our strengths would benefit and be a lot more intentional. So that's, if I miss anything, anybody in our group can add to that.
Thank you, Keith. Does anyone in Group C want to add or clarify anything? Okay, then Victoria, I'm going to turn the floor over to your group. I think it was room A or Group A.
yep, and we have Gregory has graciously agreed to be our spokesperson.
Okay, thanks. So we, although we liked how B was concise, we felt A was better because it was more relatable. B kind of really just seems to focus all on health, in our opinion, where option A had more relatable titles to citizens, we felt. Although we would modify A because all the duplications didn't seem to make, we thought we would reduce the duplications on each of these, and so I'd say a modification to A. In terms of immediate, we talked about mental and emotional health, food security being on top, and education and childcare. We had 2 discussion items on the education and childcare. One of them that relates to food security, where the Food for All campaign right now that's going on, or Food for All that's being provided by CMS, is not widely known. CMS is trying to push that all types of families whether they need the food or not, go and get the food and could donate it to others, but it's keeping people employed in CMS. Another discussion about actions to help, what actions could be taken to help parents in terms of childcare and school education, although that's part of CMS. What role does the county have in that? Could there be, we provide places for parents to drop off kids in pods or something like that? Understandably, CMS is looking at bringing kids back right now, but there are, what does that mean for teachers? Are they prepared to go back as well? And then the fourth item we talked about was healthcare as an immediate, and particularly the testing. Provided some examples about it. It's still hard to understand how to get a test, how to get free tests. There's lack of information and consolidated information about there. A lot of different facilities are providing that. And so if we can better come up with a way to provide succinct information about that, that could transcend into when the vaccines become available, because that will be a similar issue if the information to get vaccines isn't clear, and that will be important, and that's the next milestone. That was it. I think I covered what we had.
Thank you. Thank you, Greg. Anybody in that group want to add anything briefly? Okay, we're moving on to Jerome's. Jerome, are you there?
Yeah, I'm right here, and Mitzi will debrief our team.
Hi,
Okay, Mitzi.
Hi, everyone. We were actually completely split initially discussing the two options, A and B, but finalized our decision on option A. There was a lot of discussion about the overlap, which there's a lot of in all of the groups, and but we did come up with A as our selection. As it relates to the impact areas and the priority, we also fell under the category of health, with the focus being on access to health care and eliminating health disparities, along with food security as well. We also had a discussion as relates to mental health and emotional health, as that being a part of the larger access to health care grouping as well. So.
Thank you, Mitzi. Anything else that anyone would like to contribute from B, breakout B? I will add that the group realized that while the categories are for organizational purposes and organizing the work, that it really didn't matter much whether it's A or B, but how do we get the work done? So I just want to, share with everybody that there's not a whole lot of difference between A and B, but more how do we get the work accomplished and organized.
Can't hear you, Megan. You're muted.
All right, thank you. Since I was in the group C, that room, I will share with you that although the group chose B as their first option, they did talk about the food security and health and mental health issues. So I would throw out to those in that room, can you agree or come to consensus if Jerome and Victoria take the first option A and condense it and do away, eliminate those duplications, if that is something that you could live with? So I'm asking those in my room.
Yes, that'd be fine. Yes.
Yes.
Anyone opposed? Okay, then I think we have consensus, and I'm sure that Jerome and Victoria and probably Dean will have more discussion on firming up those buckets to make this large task at hand more manageable.
May I say something at this point, Megan?
Sure, go ahead.
This is Kevin Kendrick. I was in Group B.
I think that's one of the things that we discussed as a group was kind of the overlap, the intersectionality of those things. So I think at least there are a few people in our group who, we realize that this is being done for organizational purposes, but they like the intentional overlap of those areas. And in fact, one of our members said that there's intersectionality among all of those things. So I think it's going to have to be a fine line for Jerome and Victoria as they look at how we finalize what these buckets are going to look like.
Right. I think that discussion has been ongoing, especially there might be higher leverage impact areas that by focusing on one impact area, at least this is what I've heard, it's going to certainly affect the others positively. And so I'm sure that will be taken into consideration when they finalize these categories. So thank you, Kevin. Okay. Well, thank you for that work in the breakout sessions. And as I was telling those who came back earlier than the other two teams, hopefully by the time of the next meeting, we will have upgraded the WebEx application and you're not going to have to leave a meeting to go to another one. So hopefully that will be smoother the next time we get together. Now it's time to move to the next agenda item, which is the timeline proposal. And I'm going to turn this over now to Victoria and Jerome. This is a very high level, and I'm sure that you might have questions, but I'll let them explain what the thought process was going into this. So Victoria and Jerome, it's yours.
Jerome, are you okay with me kind of covering this, and you can back me up on some of it?
Absolutely. Thank you, Victoria.
Sure. So as Megan said, this is high level, and this is one, I want folks to be able to have some baseline. This is something that will change. This is just to give us an idea, a thought of where things will occur and where the milestones may be and what they might be. Because we hadn't got to the point where we knew how we were going to divide the work up with these categories of the impact areas. This, of course, can change. It sounds like we're really ready to also start thinking about our working group. So we will probably add more rows for each working group and have them shown on here. But basically, I wanted to be able to give you a visual for those folks that are the visual learners and receivers of information. Which is me. I need to kind of see how it is and how it may map out, and then we can tweak the map as we move and reality occurs, right? So that's the thought process behind here. So I've just given us our top row so we can see how many meetings we will have each month. When I did put this out, I did realize we do have some things we maybe need to discuss on organization or planning of meetings during holiday season. Because we are coming up in holiday season, and while we appreciate everybody's volunteerism, if now ever were a time to be able to spend time with your family, I feel like this is the time. So we'll be cognizant of that, and we'll come back to you, and we may modify some of these meetings around the holidays. Obviously, still maybe doing some offline work, of course. However. So that's what our first line is. We can, of course, tease that out with specific dates later so that you always have a calendar. Something else that we will be working on the back end to add to our timeline is we are going to work out a process of, we know what day we're going to distribute the agenda. We'll have that consistency, minutes from the previous meeting. We will be creating that consistency so you always know on Mondays you'll receive the agenda for the following week or what have you. And those things will get built into this document. And I also hope that one of our staff people at the county will make this a little bit prettier because this is an Excel sheet and there are better programs out there, but I'm, I guess, a little old school with some things with project management. So just talking kind of high level, our action, our work items, obviously identifying our urgent needs of focus. And I did hear some consensus for our group. Really our top two items of consensus were mental health, food security, and healthcare and access, and more specifically knowing how to access, not just getting the access, knowing how to get there first. And so I think those are the three areas. And then that will really be kind of a really quick turnaround for us in that Megan and Jerome both mentioned there is potential funding that the county has under the CARES Act that could be put towards any action items we might come up for these high urgent, high priority items. But those funds sunset on December 30th, meaning they have to be spent and out checks written by December 30th in order for them to be utilized. Which means if we have action plans to develop here, we'll have to create a team to do that quickly. So we may have our first ad hoc group created just to focus on these high priority issues and creating recommendations for how to support them financially. And I have that really occurring in concluding and being presented in October, because if we don't, I guess, try to catch these funds, the county has to put them somewhere else because we cannot lose these valuable dollars that are for helping us to respond to COVID-19. So we'll talk a little bit about that on the back end of the meeting, how we'll operationalize that, and we'll reach back out to everybody with regards to that piece. And then rolling into really our winter and fall months, doing our analysis of our working groups. So the analysis, I think, for each of the working groups is going to start at the same point, but that is where we're going to look at these areas and see, as Jerome mentioned, we have a lot of things are already occurring. We're going to dig into that. Staff's going to dig into that a little bit. What things are happening already that we can just increase capacity, support at a higher level, retool based on what we know from this pandemic, and how we need to respond to future things, look at those funding levels. So looking at our areas of strength, our areas of weakness, those areas of opportunities and threats. Some other people call them different things, and I'm open to suggestions. That's just my typical strategic planning language right there. And this could also involve us doing some community surveys that may be built into here. Maybe it's surveys of professional stakeholders and social service stakeholders. So that's something we'll need to work out when we plan what is our analysis, looking at best practices at other governments throughout the country that are not just similar in our size, but they also need to be similar in where we are as a community. We are a high growth, really young city in the making, right? I know Charlotte's been around for a long time, but we have hit such exponential growth over the past really 20 years that I've been in this county, in this city, that we need to look at folks that are dealing with the same growing pains that we are, because we've grown much faster than I think our resources had the ability to keep up with, and then we layer on a pandemic. So we have stress. So that's kind of the progression there. Of course, having those executive team meetings, which is just a term for Jerome and I and Dina and Megan, to work on the back end to make sure we get agendas prepared appropriately based on results of past meetings. We'll also probably be planning check-ins with our working groups that we're not a part of, to make sure that you have the resources that you need and that the work is on pace and on time. So we're looking at doing, analysis through all these groups, then coming back in February and reconciling all this data. And then working in the spring to develop the action plan or plans, however we determine. And that can take some time. So I really gave us about 3 months to develop these action plans and recommendations, and then a full month of work looking at how we develop the evaluations and metrics in alignment with our recommendations. Then looking at draft final products in July, finals in August, and then presenting to the Board of County Commissioners in September. So that's, like I said, is very high level. There's a lot more that goes into these sections here, but I just want something for you to reflect on and consume on what we're biting off going forward. Working groups, we will, and I've heard some good ideas about the working groups, and I think you're right. We do need to kind of start breaking off into our areas of expertise. So that's something we'll be asking how we're going to select those groups. Are we doing self-selection, or are we selecting by expertise level and resume, right? So we'll get that working quickly, and then we'll create, a representative from each one of those groups. But I'm really looking at breakout sessions really starting under the 10 impact areas as soon as November. And it could be October, we get everything formed and organized, right? So all of this is subject to modification based on how it really fleshes out. We've got a row for staff here where we be assigning the work that we need them to help us with. So that homework, that research, going out and finding those best practices for us and bringing that information back to us. So we've got a line for them to break in there. So again, this is not set in stone. It is just for knowledge at this point and to give everybody a baseline of how things could lay out.
Thank you.
Yep.
Jerome, did you want to add anything?
The only thing I would add, that was phenomenal. That was absolutely phenomenal, Victoria. The only thing I would add would be that Victoria mentioned ad hoc committees with individuals in their areas of subject matter expertise, and I am not sure we've collected the information as to what areas of expertise each of the individuals possess on this call. I believe we have information as to their interest on the task force. But for example, please correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin. I think Kevin has a focus on food insecurities, but that's through conversation with Kevin, not through, either bio or anything like that. So maybe there's an opportunity to get information as to the area of subject matter expertise from the individuals.
So there is, Jerome and Megan, when we all applied based on our resume, they kind of took from our resume and plugged us into potential areas of expertise within the 10 impact areas. So I think we can, and now it was selection on the county staff side, so it might not necessarily fully line up with what people's true expertise is beyond the resume that they submitted, right? But I think that's a starting point, so we at least have a framework to start working with, and then Megan, we'll probably look at how we get everybody to actually give us their input into it to make sure we're not accidentally plugging somebody into education and childcare and they have no background in it or things like that. Sorry.
Right, and I think Dina wasn't able to join us today, but that's certainly something that we can follow up with her. I'm sure she has much more information on how the applicants were selected, and because I'm sure it's a cross section of different experiences and qualifications. So that's something that we can follow up with Dina. Well, folks, we're running out of time quickly, and we still have a couple of more things to go over. So thank you, Victoria and Jerome, for putting this timeline together at a very high level, and I'm sure very shortly we're going to be adding to it. So just to recap, a lot has been discussed in the last hour and 20 minutes. And we started primarily with the mission statement that was drafted and received some feedback on that. And there were still some questions and clarity needed on what the definition of recovery and renewal are. And Jerome and Victoria will go back and look at the Board of County Commissioners resolution and dig a little deeper, and Victoria's word, crystallize that so that it's easier for to simplify what actions need to occur, how these ad hoc committees are going to address these impact areas with a little bit more focus. And then specifically, there was a question about the role of prevention with this task force. Is that going to be part of the role? Is that part of the resiliency? And so hopefully we'll have some more clarity on that when we get back together in a week and a half. Then we looked at the 10 impact areas. We looked at two different options, and we came to consensus on option A with some modifications in reducing the duplications. But that's going to provide a framework for moving forward, especially when you look at these subcommittees or ad hoc groups. Then Victoria presented the high-level timeline with the milestones that will hopefully provide direction as we continue to move forward. And in that, she also mentioned consistencies that we can add to that with regard to this task force and the administration part of it. So how we're going to communicate, specifically, when are we going to get the agendas out, or documentation and reports that you really need to review prior to coming to the meeting, so that we're not bombarding you with emails. And so in that, I want to just plug this in, the SharePoint site. If you haven't gotten on that yet, please go in and make sure that you have access. If you're struggling with that, if you would email Chris Daniels directly, because he is the administrator of that SharePoint site. And we will look at organizing that in a user-friendly way so that you will always have the documents. You're going to be able to collaborate with each other live on that. Chris, do you have anything you want to add real quickly about that SharePoint site?
No, just, be sure to let me know if you have issues accessing. It's a little easier than the typical way we share that outside the county's network. So far I've had people tell me that they have been able to get in and have not had access issues. But if you have any, let me know and I can reset your access. You're on mute. You're on mute, Megan.
Well, you've only had to correct me twice. Victoria and Jerome, did I leave anything out in the summary that you would like to reiterate?
I think you nailed it. I don't have anything else to add.
You're good. I think you've covered everything I see on my notes.
Okay. Well, then, next steps. Victoria, I believe you already mentioned some with your discussion on the timeline. Do you want to reiterate anything on that? Again, the question came up, and you've addressed this about the ad hoc committees and potentially getting those together November, but maybe at least one or two funding sources prior to November.
Yeah, so I obviously Jerome and I need to collaborate on this and think after the meeting on how we'll put this together. But it could possibly be we kind of have our immediate needed group that may just be made up of volunteers that want to participate in that, so that we can make recommendations for that CARES Act funding. And then we'll have to give more thought in how we're going to pull together those working group committees for the rest of, for the three buckets. So I would say that is our next step as that executive team are the next 2 weeks we'll be working, well, really the next week, so that we can have this information out to you all and forecast for the next meeting. So that is going to be a very important and vital next step that we take on our end to administratively get everybody ready for that next component of the work.
Third time.
Well, I saw Jerome's picture pop up, so I thought he had something to add. And okay, you're keeping score now.
Oh, nothing to add on my end. I do think that I actually have a question for Victoria and Megan. We talked about debriefing after our meeting. Are we debriefing today? Because I don't see a spot on my calendar. If not, that's okay, but I just wanted to clarify that.
Yes, that was all right, you can hear me. That was the original plan, and I told Chris about that because he was not aware. He was not in the office when we made this decision and just came back today. He thought he would just go ahead and remain on this meeting if everyone leaves, if that still works for you.
Absolutely.
Victoria, you good with that?
Yep, that works for me.
Megan, there is a question in the chat from Kevin asking if Jerome and Victoria will interact with the business roundtable to ensure coordination. He knows that was a concern about that duplication with some commissioners.
I am concerned about that as well. So I will bring that forward to Dina because that came up through some of my thoughts over the weekend as well. That we could very well be doing work that they're already doing, and we don't want that to happen given the time frame that we have and the workload that's before us.
Thank you for checking on that, Bruce.
And part of our charge is to interact with the business roundtable, as well as meeting on opportunity, as well as the Charlotte Executive Leadership Council. And that's why during that initial period, Kevin, September, October, there is a lot of behind the scenes groundwork that the county staff will be assisting us in gathering. Because once again, Kevin, we really don't want to spin our wheels duplicating activity. That, as far as I'm concerned, I'll just editorialize. That's one of the biggest mistakes we can make.
I completely agree. Thank you for doing that. Really appreciate it.
And thank you for providing that clarity. And yes, Kevin, that's an interesting concern. So I'm glad you brought it up. Well, we are ending our time, and just very quickly, again, just a very quick evaluation of this meeting. What went well? What could we do better? Any suggestions? And I do think that it's going to get much easier with the breakout sessions once we upgrade the WebEx application. So thoughts? How about the time? We did this in an hour and a half.
I felt like the time, we were kind of under time constraint and we didn't get to finish. I think that having 20 minutes, I would almost rather have less of a, I don't know what, introduction or something, and more time with the separate groups. Because I felt like we felt really, I mean, I thought 20 minutes to do what we were asked to do was a very short time.
I agree.
That's feedback, and I'm thinking that perhaps when we get the SharePoint more organized, then a lot of that introduction work, you can just refer back to the minutes and the summary and any pre-reading that we had to go over, and we could probably trim at least 5 or 10 minutes off this. Any other suggestions?
Yeah, I'd like to suggest that if those that had an opportunity to dig deep into the COVID-19 recovery renewal task force overview document, that document is really key to look at activities, programs, funding that's already going on, so that there is an understanding of what's already out there. And so that was distributed, with the other materials, and I think it's a key document to really delve into.
Okay, well, this will conclude the second meeting. And if you had any trouble finding the WebEx invitation, because I know you received 2 for this meeting, the breakout session, please check your spam, box in your email account. Sometimes it goes there. And if you don't receive the invitation before the next meeting, let me know or Chris Daniels know, and we'll make sure that you get that.
Chris, I had a quick question for you before we leave. I used the Zoom that you sent, and then the breakout session Zoom came later. There's not a way to always use the same one each time, so you could just store that in a folder. Do they have to be duplicated? Do they have to be rejuvenated each time before each meeting?
So the one that I sent out is through the length of this through the length of the task force. So it should not change. That meeting ID and everything should stay the same. The breakouts are different because we had to schedule them differently. Hopefully, as Megan said, that will be alleviated once we get the upgrade in of the new WebEx version. But that's the only reason why they're different right now.
Thanks.
Yep.
Okay. Well, with that, if everyone, you have a great evening and exit the meeting, and Chris, Jerome, and Victoria and I will remain in meeting. So we'll see you next time.